Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Candace and I make sewing and DIY videos and also sewing patterns. So this is my second sewing pattern that I'm releasing on my own. I released one about 4 years ago, and I also run Stay Stitch Pattern Co with my friend Lindsay, and we've been doing that for about 3 years and we have 10 patterns in our collection. So if you want to check any of those out, I'm going to link everything in the description. But I'm really excited for this one because I've been wanting to release more patterns on my own, and this has been just a long time coming, and I'm really excited about this one because it's really beautiful and has a lot of really fun details. It is called the Strawberry Shortcake Dress and it comes with 4 views. There's 2 dress views and 2 top views. And it's a really comfortable and easy to fit garment. Everything is fit with elastics and it's super adjustable and comes in sizes 00 to 34. So when I was designing this pattern, I really wanted something that would be comfortable, but also very cute and very chic. And I think that we've achieved that because I really love all the design details. It has a very fitted look, but it is very comfortable because everything is fit with elastics or shirring. And I wanted to do that because I am someone who spent the last 6 years being either pregnant, postpartum, breastfeeding, going through IVF, all the things that make your weight fluctuate an extreme amount. So designing something that was comfortable and adjustable was key. I really appreciate garments and patterns that can see me through different stages of life. This pattern is also super hackable. There's so many different ways that you can hack it to make it into different garments, and I love that about it. And I'm always looking for hacking potential when I buy patterns on my own. So I've included a bunch of hack options and ideas in the instruction booklet itself to give you some inspiration on how you can make even more than just the 4 views that are available. So this pattern is designed for woven fabrics that are lighter weight, and I would say not to go over like a 4.5 ounce or 150 GSM just because it is fit with shirring or elastic channels, and shirring does not work on fabrics that are too heavy, and elastic channels will be really difficult to sew on something that is too thick. So fabrics like cotton voile, cotton lawn, lightweight linens, linen viscose blends are really beautiful. This one is a linen viscose blend. Drapey fabrics, rayons, those would all be really nice in this pattern. This is a digital pattern, so all the files are PDFs. And if you're newer to using PDF patterns and you want a little bit of guidance, I have a whole YouTube video on how to read and use sewing patterns, which I will link up here. But this pattern comes with a few different files. It comes with print at home files, which you can print on your home computer onto US letter or A4 paper. It comes with a copy shop file or A0 file, which you can print out at UPS or a large format printing place. And it also comes with a projector file because I use a projector now. I love projectors and they make sewing so much faster. I've taken a lot of time to put in as much detail into the instructions as possible to make the sewing experience as pleasant as possible. So I've got steps on how to lengthen and shorten the dress if you are taller or shorter than me. I'm 5'6", and I've also included instructions on how to do a full bust adjustment if you have a larger cup size. And there's a lot of information on shirring and also creating bias tape. There's a couple different options on doing that. I include the steps to create continuous bias tape. So definitely take a read of the instruction booklet. There are a lot of pages, but I promise they're all there for a reason and they all have very valuable information in them. And I tried to write it in a very easy, digestible language. So definitely take a read of it before you start cutting and sewing. So today's sew along is going to be for view B, which is this dress. This view features a slightly scooped neckline with a split at the bust. It's completely adjustable. You can like close it up all the way if you want. And the strap is actually fed through a bias neckline channel and ties at the front. Then there are 3 exposed elasticated channels and pockets, of course. And both views feature a slightly curved drop waist and a full gathered midi skirt. So yeah, I'm gonna stop rambling and we're gonna get into the sew along. So this is a bit what your pattern pieces will look like. As I said, I'm gonna use my projector for most of this just because it is quicker and easier, but I wanted to show you what pieces would look like. They're all labeled with the name, the pattern piece, the view, how many pieces to cut, and then there's also the markings like grain line, whether to cut and fold. And as I was saying, the bias tape pieces, you can cut them all out in paper as well if you want to cut them fully. And they also have the grain line, and I've put on the width as well in case you're doing continuous bias tape and want to know the width. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the PDF file has a layers function. So if you want to only have your size on here, you can just turn off all the other layers and you'll get rid of all the other lines, so it won't be so hard to see where to cut. The instruction booklet has some information on how to use layers in Adobe Reader, but you're going to look for a button that looks like 2 little pages. It looks like this, and you're going to click on that, and that will bring up all of the layers in the file, and you'll see that there's all the sizes there, and you can toggle on or off any of the sizes that you want. Just make sure that you don't uncheck the pattern notations and the tiling layer checkbox, but this is really handy if you just want to see your size lines only. There are also a bunch of cutting layout pages, so if you need help knowing how to place your pattern pieces on your fabric, make sure to check out the diagrams there. And there's also a guide to bias tape, and I'll talk a little bit more about that after we cut out these pieces. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be using my projector for cutting out some of this just because I find it to be a lot faster. I'm planning on doing a YouTube video on projectors because I've had a lot of questions about it, but it's really sped up my sewing process and saves me so much time. It also makes marking on lines like the ones in this pattern super easy. I find that it can be a little hard to do that with paper, but this has totally changed my life and I love it. This dress view has quite a few pieces to cut, so make sure you check out the pattern piece legend so that you cut out all the pieces that you need. All right, cutting is my least favorite part, but I have almost everything cut out. I cut out my upper bodice, lining, and main. I use the same fabric for both, and these are my 2 skirt pieces, and then my front and back lower bodice pieces with the elastic channel markings marked onto them. And now I'm going to cut all the bias tape. For view B, there is bias tape at the neckline. It creates a little channel for the strap, and the strap is also bias tape, and then there's also elasticated channels, and those are also made of bias tape. So you can check the instructions to see the exact amounts, but on the guide to bias page, I've put out the square dimensions that you'll need to use to get the amount that you need. So for my size, I'm making a size 10. I'm going to need a 22 by 22 inch square, and then I can cut my strips from that. So I actually prefer to cut strips and sew them together, but I will show you the continuous bias tape method today in case you've never done it and you want to see how to do it. So here's my fabric that I'm going to cut my square out of. Since this is the selvage edge and this edge is straight right now, I've marked out 22 inches here and here. I'm just going to take this corner and fold it up, and that will help me create a perfect square. Once we have our square cut out, we're going to cut it in half diagonally, and then we're going to place the 2 triangles like so, and we're going to sew this bottom edge together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and then press it open. Then we're going to flip our piece over so it's wrong sides facing up, and now we're going to mark our bias lines onto the fabric. So this diagonal edge is the bias edge, and we're going to mark our lines parallel to that line. And for this view, we need a lot of 1 1/4 inch bias tape. So I'm going to mark lines that are 1 1/4 inch away from each other, parallel to that diagonal line, which is the bias grain. There was just a little bit of excess at the end of mine, so I just trimmed that off. And then we're going to flip our piece of fabric over so the right side is facing up, and then we're going to bring the short edges together like so. Before we sew it together, we're going to offset the lines by 1 row, and this is going to allow us to cut it all in one continuous piece. So with the lines offset, we're going to pin these edges together, right sides together, and sew it together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to press it open. And once we've done that, we can just cut all of our tape. So we're just going to cut along all of those lines that we marked, and we'll have our continuous bias tape. So now that I have all of this bias tape, I'm going to cut the pieces that I need according to the chart. For size 10, I need 3 elastic channels that are 52.5 inches long, 2 strap pieces which are 32 inches long, and then I also need the 2 neckline channel pieces, but those are slightly wider, so I'm just going to cut those from my scrap fabric. Elastic channels, straps. It seems so crazy to me that you can get so much bias tape out of one kind of small square. This is what I have left over. I'm going to save this for like another project because it's slightly too narrow. And now I'm just going to cut out those 2 neckline channels. So step number 1 for view B and view D is to mark all your shirring lines on, which I did when I cut out my pieces, and also mark the center of the bottom raw edge on both pieces. And then we're gonna finish the side seams with a serger or a zigzag stitch. So I have my back pieces and my front pieces. So I'm gonna take 2 mirrored front pieces and 1 of the back pieces, and we're gonna sew the side seams together on the back and the front. So here and here. Then we're going to take our neckline channel pieces, which are pattern piece D, and we're going to press the short ends in by 1/4 inch, and then we're going to press it in half. And we'll do this for both pieces. Then we're going to bring these pieces over to our front upper bodice piece, and we're going to center them on the neckline. So they should be 3/4 of an inch shorter than the total length of the neckline, and there should be 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter at each end. Pin the channel in place, and then we're going to baste it at 1/4 of an inch. And you want to make sure that the folded edge is on the bottom and the raw edge is on the top, and we're going to sew through all 3 layers. And you'll just repeat this for the other side afterwards. This is what your pieces should look like, and then we're going to move on to creating the straps. And those are pattern piece L, and we'll place the long edges right sides together and sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So once you've sewn them with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, we're going to turn them to the right side. And these straps are pretty long, so it can be difficult to do it with a safety pin or with a loop turner, even depending on how thick your fabric is. In the instructions, I do say to use a loop turner, but I'm gonna show you a little trick that I like to use. So I have just a darning needle here. It's pretty thick and it has a really big blunt end. I'm using embroidery thread, and I have a pretty long length here. I'm doubling it up, and I'm also tying a knot at the end so it won't come out of the needle. And now I'm just going to poke it through the end of the strap, and then I'm gonna go back through the thread, just where the knot is, so that it secures itself to the strap. And now it's not gonna go anywhere. And now I'm just going to thread the needle through the strap. I find that this works really well when you have a stiffer fabric and it's really hard to turn the strap. Okay, I have the needle out now, and I'm just gonna start pulling the strap down the thread. So I just have to pull this part over the knot. But now we can just pull it right through. And I'm just holding onto this thread up here. And you kind of want to pull from the part that's closest to the knot or like the end of your loop turner, because if you don't, it will get all bunched up at that area and get really hard to turn. So I'm just pulling from the very bottom. And I guess I'll show you how to turn the other one with a loop turner in case you don't know how to use a loop turner, because when I first got my loop turner, I was using it incorrectly. So here's what a loop turner looks like. It has a circle on one end and then a hook and a little latch on the other end. And before we turn it, I'm just going to trim the seam allowance down just a little bit to like 1/8 of an inch. And then we're going to place the loop turner inside the strap, and we're going to pull the strap all the way to the bottom. And then at the top, we're going to push that little arm piece through the strap, and the top of the hook will hook around the fabric. The first time I used this, I thought you had to like close the latch and like lock it behind the hook, but you don't need to do that. It just works with like physics. When you pull it, the latch will stay up, and it is a little tricky. So at the top, I like to just pull the fabric over the hook to get it started, and then you'll just pull it gently until it's turned inside out. And you want to make sure that you're pulling near the hook end of the loop turner, because if you don't, it will start bunching up near the bottom, and then it will be really hard to pull, and you might lose the end of the loop turner. Once you've sewn and pressed both of your straps, you're going to take them and place them at the notches on the back upper bodice piece and clip them in place. You can also baste them if you like, making sure they are on the right side of the fabric. I like to have the seams of the straps facing the side seams, and then you're going to take your other bodice piece and sandwich the straps in between, and then clip or pin all along the neckline. And then we're going to sew it all together. So you're going to start at the bottom of the center front of the front upper bodice piece, and you're going to sew up and then across the neckline and then around the armholes and around the back. And you want to make sure when you're sewing across the channel that you sew with a very precise seam allowance, because otherwise you will close up the channel and not be able to thread your strap through it. Next, we're going to create the elastic channel on the back of the bodice. So we're going to sew 1/2 inch from the top edge just between the straps, and you're going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Then you'll cut your elastic piece according to the chart and the instructions. Mine is 11 inches, and we're going to feed it through the channel. I'm going to use a loop turner, and this part is a little bit finicky because it's between the main and lining, but I'm just inserting my loop turner, grabbing a hold of my elastic, and pulling it through. Make sure it's not twisted, and then we're going to secure it in place with a couple lines of vertical stitching. I like to go back and forth a few times just to make sure it's really secure. And here is what your piece should be looking like. I had to turn a lamp on because there's no light because it's still the dead of winter, it feels like. But now we're going to do the pockets. I almost skipped doing the pockets in this Sewalong to make it faster, but I really do like pockets in my dresses, and I think most people do. So we're just going to finish all the edges of all 4 pocket pieces with the serger or a zigzag stitch. Once we've finished all of the edges of our pocket pieces, we're going to line them up with the notches that are on our bodice, and we're going to be placing them right sides together, and we're going to sew with a scant 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance for all 4 pockets. We'll press the pockets away from the dress and understitch. Understitching is going to make sure the seam allowance stays towards the pocket, and also will keep the pockets from rolling out. Then we're going to place the bodice pieces right sides together, and we're going to sew from the top down to the pocket, pivoting, and then around the pocket and pivot at the bottom again. And next we're going to sew the upper bodice to the lower bodice, and we're going to sew them together right sides together. I like to start by matching up the side seams of the upper and lower bodice and pinning, and then pinning the back, and then pinning the front bodices. So in this video I haven't basted the front pieces together, but in the instructions I do say that it helps to do that because the front upper bodice pieces have to be butted right up against each other, so basting it is going to help you do that more easily. Once you have everything pinned, we're going to sew all the way around with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance, going through all the layers. This is what your bodice piece should be looking like, and then we're just going to finish that raw edge with a serger or a zigzag stitch and press it down towards the bodice. Okay, so this is what we've got so far. I'm going to thread these straps through the front neckline channel. You don't have to do that right now. That's just where they go at the end. And the next thing to do is to sew on all of the elastic channels around the bodice. So all of those lines that we marked earlier, we're going to sew our bias tape channels on. The elastic channels, we're going to take our bias pieces, which are piece K, and we're going to press the long edges in towards the center like this, and then we're going to press the short ends in by 1/4 inch. If you have a bias tape maker, that could help, but you can also use a pin like I'm doing here. So we're going to take one of the channel pieces, and the first channel is going to cover the seam between the upper and lower bodice. So just line that folded end up with the side seam, and then we're going to sew it all the way around the bodice. And this is much easier to sew on the free arm, so if you can do that on your machine, you can remove that piece now. And now we are going to just sew the elastic channels on. And as I said, this is easiest if you don't pin it, just because you need to kind of manipulate the fabric. So make sure your lines are really clearly marked, and just sew a little bit at a time, and keep checking that you're following your lines with your channel. So because bias tape is a bit stretchy, I like to wait till I get to the end to trim my piece. So once you sew all the way around and get back to the side seam, I like to trim it just 1/4 inch longer than I need. Then I will fold it and then edge stitch it down in place. And then we're just going to secure the bottom edge by edge stitching 1/16 of an inch away from the bottom folded edge all the way around. So this is the first elastic channel that's sewn on, and they meet right at the side seam. and there's a little opening at the end where we're gonna thread our elastic. So just wanted to show you what that looks like. And I'm just gonna complete the other two now. I have all of my elastic channels sewn in. There's 3 of them here. Now we're just gonna take our elastic and wrap it around ourselves to determine how much we need. So we wanna wrap it around yourself where these seams are gonna hit. So one's gonna be right under your bust, one will be at your natural waist, and one will be on your lower waist. And you wanna wrap it taut, but not too tight, and then leave 2 inches of excess. So I just cut one for my bust, and then for my waist, I'll do one about here. That feels pretty good. So I'll cut a little extra. And then the lower one will be just around, like, I feel like it's around my belly button-ish. So cut your 3 elastics, and then you'll use whatever you want to thread it through. I find it easier to use a long bodkin like this. I got this at Daiso, I think. It's just a plastic long kind of like needle. I tied my elastic to the end like this just so that I don't lose it, because it is quite a far way to have to thread the elastic. But yeah, if you have to use a safety pin, that's fine. It'll just take a while. To make sure that your elastic doesn't get twisted, I like to mark on the elastic on the same side, so when it comes out I can match them up and make sure it's nice and flat. And then when you get to the end, you can safety pin them together just to check that they're a good length for you. And then we're gonna use a zigzag stitch to sew the ends together. And you wanna sew along the entire length of the excess so that it lays nice and flat inside the channels. Once you've sewn the ends together, just stretch it out a little to pop the elastic into the channel. I have all the elastic in the channels now. I zigzag stitched them all down. And now the last thing to do is attach the skirt, hem it, and close up these channels by hand sewing them. So before I start anything, I'm just gonna make sure that I have all of my notches marked. You wanna have the center of both of the skirts marked on the top edge. Then we're gonna sew down the side seams with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance, and then we're gonna finish the edges and press them towards the back of the skirt. And now we're gonna run 2 lines of gathering stitches on the front and the back. So I would do them separately because this is a very wide skirt and I think it's just too much fabric to do it all in one line of stitching, and it's just easier to match up. So a gathering stitch I like to do at like the longest that my machine will do, so that's 5 millimeters, and I'm going to sew them at 1/4 of an inch and 3/4 of an inch from the raw edge. And I also am gonna switch out the bobbin thread to a different color. I find that it really helps. I didn't used to do it, but it really helps you see which threads you should be holding on to, and if you drop them, you can find them easily. It's also a really nice way to use up bobbins that you don't need that color for anymore. So I have this green one that I was sewing something green with, so we're gonna use that. And just make sure that you're leaving long tails at the end so that you can pull on them together. Then we can just start gathering each of the skirts separately. So just pull on the bobbin threads gently and gather up the fabric. I like to just gather it all down first and then adjust it to the length of the bodice. When we're ready to attach the skirt, we're going to turn the skirt inside out, but keep the bodice right side out. And we're gonna just turn the bodice upside down to make this a little easier. And we'll be placing the bodice inside of the skirt, so right sides are facing each other. Then I like to start at the side seams, so I pin the side seams together. And before you do that, just make sure that you've made the markings and the instructions. I specify to mark in the seam allowance on the skirt and the bodice because it comes to a point, so it makes it a lot easier to sew this accurately if you mark the seam allowance in prior to and then pin that with pins. And I find that that will make that process a lot smoother. After I've pinned my side seams really precisely, then I'll match up my center notches on the skirt and the bodice and pin those together, and then I'll redistribute the gathering so that it matches the length between the side seams and the center notches. After everything is distributed nicely and pinned together, we'll sew it with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance all the way across. and then we'll finish it with a serger or a zigzag stitch and press the seam down towards the bottom of the skirt. And when finishing the seams, I like to do the front skirt on its own and then the back skirt on its own, since they do come to a point at the side. So I just serge the front and then serge off and then serge the back. And then lastly, we're going to do the hem. So we're going to press the bottom edge of the skirt up by 1/4 inch, and then we're going to press it up again by 2 inches. Then we'll just edge stitch that all in place, and we are almost done. We just have to hand sew the elastic channels at the waist closed, and that's it. I hope you found this sew along helpful, and I hope you love the pattern. If you make it, make sure to use the hashtag Strawberry Shortcake Dress or Strawberry Shortcake Top, and make sure to tag me at Sew Bake Make on Instagram and TikTok, and I will see you in the next video.